Hi, everybody. Welcome to Walk Worthy. I'm Erin.
And I'm Lindsay, and today we have a special guest with us. This is Randi Cecil. She has an incredible testimony of God's ability to restore a broken marriage. And so I'm really excited to get to, I've heard the story before, but I'm excited to get to hear it again, just because it is so powerful. So let's get started. My first question is, tell us how long you were married before your marriage fell apart, and what was that season like?
Okay, so we were married in July of 2008, and we both were like your average rural American people, like chasing the American dream. We were both in college, and so we were trying to finish that and working, and we're married, and we're not seeing each other a whole lot that first year, and I got pregnant about 10 months. That was like a big surprise after we were married, and we were terrified and excited all at the same time, and we lived in this little bitty apartment, and we bought a house, so it's like all the American dream, you
It's
know,
lining up.
lining
Yep,
right
yep.
up and going exactly how we thought it should go. And we bought our house, and it was about, so my son was born in 2010, and then towards the end of that year, our marriage, I noticed that there was something. We weren't clicking. I was a new mom, and I put all of my emphasis on my son, and I wasn't really wanting to go to work or to go back to school. I hadn't finished my degree. Brian had. He's a registered nurse, and he finished his degree, and he was working full-time nights. So I guess I thought that's what was contributing to, like, okay, he's stressful, he's stressed out, he's not sleeping a lot because he's working nights, and he has a pretty intense job. And so I kind of put it off to that and just kind of lived my own life. And when he was home sleeping, I would try to find things to do, like with my sister or my mom or some friends, and that's just how it was. And that went on, like I said, later that year of 2010, and then the storm hit in the summer of 2011.
So would you say it was more of a drift, or was it some marriages get really combative and contentious, others just seem to drift? I guess what would characterize
it was more of a drift. It wasn't contentious at all.
Okay.
We weren't like fighting. I mean, there was little bickering and not being on the same page, but it was more of a drift. There wasn't these big fights, but there was subtle things that I could see my husband distancing himself. Like he at one point told me that, like, I kept telling him I loved him, and he's like, I just can't say it anymore because I love you as my son's mother, and kind of like I would love my sister.
Wow.
I'm like, oh, that kind of hurts.
Yeah.
Like, and that was happening in the winter time. He had done that a couple times, and he would wake up, like he would sleep during the day. He'd come home from work, he would sleep during the day, and then he would wake up in the afternoon and just, he'd eat dinner, like I'd make dinner, we'd kind of hang out, and as soon as I put my son to bed, he's like, I didn't sleep good, I'm going to bed. And like he wouldn't hang out with me. So I felt alone
Okay.
a lot.
Did you yourself feel, I mean, that's a bombshell to say, I
It
love you like
was.
my sister.
Yeah, it
But
was.
and you felt the impact of that, obviously. Did that ring any alarm bells in your mind, or?
It just, I started thinking, like, what am I doing wrong? We need to do more together. Like, maybe I've heard of this, like, where you have a kid and then marriages start drifting apart. And I understand that he has, like, this busy schedule, and I don't really. And he was upset that I wasn't, like, pursuing work anymore. Like, I kind of made the decision I wanted to stay home, and he was kind of upset about that. So I thought maybe he's upset, so he's trying to, like, prove a point to me and get me to do what he wants me to do. Like,
Right.
that's kind of, but I did not think anything other than that.
Okay.
So you said the storm hit that summer. What was the storm? When did it all kind of come to a culmination?
It started towards the end of June. He got more distant. He started lying. He would have his phone, like, literally in the shower. Like, it was never left out.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, this is a little strange. And that was going on for months, but it like all of a sudden hit me like, who takes their phone into the shower?
Yeah.
Like, okay, this is strange. And so I just started thinking a little bit more, and I had mentioned it to a family member. I don't remember what family member, and they said, well, could he be seeing somebody else?
Mm.
I said, no, there's no way. I would know that.
Yeah.
No way.
Right.
No way. And I thought about that for about a week. Like, could that happen?
Mhm.
Like, I just couldn't imagine it. And went to my Verizon phone log. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to check. And there was a number very, very often that I did not recognize. It was on there. And I called it.
Wow.
Whoa.
And a woman answered the phone. And she said, who is this? And I said, this is Randi, Brian Cecil's wife. And she hung up.
Okay.
And my husband was sleeping at the time. And I was not at home when I made that phone call. I was at my parents' house. And I left my son, who was 18 months at the time. I drove home, whipped open that door to the bedroom as he's sleeping. And I threw the Verizon papers at him. And I said, what is this? And he's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I've been sleeping. And which he was. He was like,
He probably was gonna like, whoa.
and I just said, what is this? He's like, that's just somebody at work that's going through a hard time, and I've been helping her. And I'm like, well, why would she hang up on me then?
Mm.
And he's like, seriously, that's all it is. That's all it is. And I just knew that it was more. And so he went to work that night, and it was like a week. We were supposed to go on a camping trip with my family for the 4th of July weekend, something I had done as a kid, and then he became a part of that when he got married to me. We always went 4th of July weekend camping trip, and he told me he couldn't get work off, and that I should just go.
Mm.
And I said, I'm not going unless you're going. And he's like, well, I can't get work off. I have to work the holiday. I said, I guess Bryce and I will stay home.
Mm.
And he really tried. Like, you should go. You shouldn't miss this. This is something you've always done. I'm just going to be working. You're not even going to see me. And I said, that's fine. We'll stay home. And he went to work, and it just, like, he said he loved me when he walked out the door, and he gave me a kiss and said, I'll see you in the morning. And I said, there's something wrong. He hasn't told me he loved me in months.
Yeah.
So I called him at, like, midnight and said that there was a weird noise.
Mm.
First of all, he answered his phone right away. He was at work. And he's like, super nice. It's fine. Like, it's 4th of July weekend. Like, there's going to be noises. And I'm like, well, I'm really scared. And he's like, it's fine. If you need me, you just call. And I said, all right. So out of character for the past, like, 7 months. And so I called his work. And the woman answered, and I said, can I speak with Brian Cecil? And she said, I'm sorry, sweetheart. He's not working tonight.
Wow.
And so I called him again. I said, you have 20 minutes to get home.
Wow.
And he made it home. And yeah,
And that was how you found out.
that's how I found out.
So what was the conversation then after that? So does he finally come clean? Okay, you're right.
Kind of. Still not, like, fully. But
Yeah.
he said, our marriage is just not working. And I'm like, well, are you seeing her? He's like, no, I told you I was helping her. I'm like, no, this is more than just helping. Like, you need to stop that. And he said, I'm not gonna. She needs my help. And so that was like a week of that going on and trying. I was like, well, I want our marriage to work, and I want to stay married to you. What do you want? He's like, I don't know. And then after a couple days, he's like, I do not want to be married to you. I want out. I want a divorce.
Wow.
And he packed his stuff and he left.
That's a pretty quick succession of events.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you feel having discovered this? I mean, it wasn't like he came clean and was like, I'm so sorry. You know, he lied to you for a season and then ultimately left.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel in that season?
Completely broken.
Yeah.
it was like my heart was ripped out. Like I couldn't breathe. There was like a physical reaction along with an emotional reaction to it. It was devastating.
Did you, what are some of the thoughts that you had during that time? Like, were there questions, shame or guilt or just anger, thoughts about him, thoughts about yourself?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Yes. I instantly felt completely insecure with myself as a woman, that I wasn't enough for my husband, that he had to leave, that he chose to leave me. So all of those insecurities that we have as women definitely came to the surface. I was angry that he could even do something like that. Somebody that I trusted and loved so much that it was just betrayal. Like I felt completely betrayed and just hurt.
So he leaves. Where does he go?
Part-time at his parents and part-time with this other person.
So it's been about a week. He leaves. And then what do you do? What does your life look like at that moment? And
well, not very good. I was a complete disaster.
Yeah.
Like I was crying a lot. I could barely take care of my kid.
Yeah.
Like I needed help with that. And thankfully I had some very loving family members and friends that would help me. So because I was in such a broken place, the only place I could think of that would be a healthy place to go was church. And so I Googled churches near me and the Rock Church came up. And I went to church the Sunday after he had left. I believe the 4th of July was on a weekend. So it was like a week later, I decided to go to church.
What was your history? Had you been to church when you were a child? Did you have any belief whatsoever?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I was not brought up in the church. I was like a Christmas, Easter churchgoer. Went when I was really little, but that I don't remember as much as that we went Christmas and Easter. And so there was a knowledge of God and Jesus and whatnot. And I grew up being, like I said, I was this average rural American girl, and I always had like this irrational fear, I guess, of God. I had to be good in order to receive God's favor. And that's how I lived my life. And so on the outside, if anybody would have known me, they would have thought I was Christian. I followed all rules. I grew up in the 80s, 90s. So what the cultural morals were at the time, I followed.
Okay.
I didn't date. I didn't, drink alcohol. I didn't break the law at all. And like even into marriage, like I followed all the rules, and I felt that was earning favor from God. And if I did that, bad things wouldn't happen. And also that I had to do those things to, if there was a heaven, be able to be there.
Yeah.
That's how I grew up, and thinking. That's not how my family all thought. This was my personal, so there was like this sense of perfection. I had to be good in everything I did. I had to work hard. I just had to do all that. And so that was that was me.
So you come to church. What's that first Sunday like?
It was intense. It was like the music. It was just, there was something about that. Like I didn't know it was the Holy Spirit at the time, but there was movement, and I'm like, okay, this is getting a little bit strange, but this is okay. And then the pastor came and he gave the message, and it felt like he was talking to me. It was almost scary. Like, okay, this is weird. Like his example probably was something about Alaska or something anyway. Like,
There's a good chance.
So but it touched something in me, and so it put a fire that I need to go back to that. And so I came back the next Sunday. The gospel was clearly shared and to where I understood it. And I went and thought about it and pondered on it all day. I actually went and bought this Bible that day.
Okay.
And was alone in my bedroom, and that's where I knew that I needed Jesus, that I was a sinner, and all that good was nothing. I tried so hard, and in that, it wasn't like I hear some people that talk about like that they realize that they're sinners and they're doing all these awful things and they need to change. I was not doing like dramatic, awful things. It wasn't like this road to Damascus, like transformation.
Yeah.
It was like a heavy weight lifted off that I didn't have to be that. He did it for me.
That's good.
And I could choose it because I wanted to, because he loved me and I love him. And so it was so freeing.
So powerful. So you come to know the Lord, obviously radically changed in yourself. What did the next few weeks look like? Did that change? I guess, what were the day-to-day things you were doing? You're just kind of in this weird limbo. Is my marriage, ending? Is he filing for divorce? Or what was that like when you have this newfound faith, but you're not really sure what's happening or what to do?
Yeah, it was crazy. Like, honestly, like every minute was different. Every hour was different. My emotions were all over the place. I didn't know, I had no focus. It was just a very strange time for me. I felt very lonely and broken still. I mean, it's still, I had a child with him, so I had to interact with him because I wanted my marriage. Even before I was saved, the day he walked out, I wanted my marriage to stay together and to work it out. I was willing to do that. I didn't know what I was willing to do at the time, but I was like, I want this. I'll figure it out. Like, we'll just figure it out. Like, I was going to figure it out. But that was my thoughts. And so when I prayed for my salvation, I spent hours that evening. I don't think I slept that night. I prayed a lot, and I felt God speak to my heart that I was to hold on. I just felt like he said, hold on. I'm like, I don't know what I'm holding on to, but here we go.
Yeah.
And so it was just chaotic. It really was. Like, just because I was saved didn't like transform my personality or the hurt or anything. That was all still there. So it was like I was wrestling with that while trying to find out the whole character of who Jesus is.
Yeah, right.
Because I don't know.
And you at this time are saying, I want my marriage to work. And Brian's perspective is what?
I do not want to be married to you.
Period. There's no hope.
There's no hope.
Let me go.
Over.
So, and yet you still are trying to hold on to this dead marriage.
I probably looked very crazy to him. Like, I'm sure it was very, like, he was probably like, I cannot shake this girl. Like, she will not go away. Like, no matter what I do. And he would try. And I should have prefaced this. Brian is completely 1,000% on board with me sharing anything today. We have prayed about this. And we talked about it. And he told me he was trying to do everything in his power to make me hate him.
Wow.
Which he was doing a really good job. Like, he really was, like, very cold. Very, like, I don't care what you want. I don't want to be with you. Like, we'll do this for Bryce. Like,
be kind and amicable for Bryce, but this is not a relationship.
Right.
So your family, what is your family saying to you at this point? And your friends and your people?
Yeah. My family was just as shocked. Like, yeah, it was so much of a shock. We kept, like, I put on that front that everything was okay for those, like, 9 months of terrible marriage. Nobody knew. So I think they had to digest, like, just the shock. They loved him. He was their son-in-law. They truly did love him. And so they were just in shock. And they knew that I wanted the marriage to work, and they were willing to support me in that. So that's kind of where they were at, but still trying to navigate it. There's almost like a a level of grief in that because it is a loss. And so they were grieving their way with trying to support me. And so that was okay. Like it was a weird, like I felt like I had their support, but it was also really hard.
Was there anyone that told you like you should be done with him? He did this to you. He hurt you like
there was many people. I had many friends like, are you insane?
Right.
Like, why he's just going to do it again. That said a lot. And so yes, there was acquaintances and friends that I tried to keep it real quiet, so it didn't really come out for a couple months because I just from a small town. Everybody knows everybody. You know, Brian and I graduated from a small school. We were high school sweethearts, so we were the couple like that everybody was looking at. It was we were under a microscope, and I didn't want that yet.
Well, and how humiliating. Like, I was so humiliating.
I was so humiliated. I was embarrassed. I was like, and nobody would even know, but I'm like, how did I go this long without knowing? Like, how do you stay in a marriage and not know? Like, it really happens. Like, I had no idea.
Well, that probably makes you ask questions about yourself and your ability to discern people and trust and like, what a mess.
Yeah, and I would say that probably still affects me to this day.
Sure.
That I'm really careful because of the effects of that.
Definitely.
So you decide you want to hang on to this dead marriage. What do you do? How do you do that?
God. I mean, that's the only answer I can give because there was nothing I could do. The very first months, I tried to control everything, that I was going to make it better by how, I looked, and I was like done up to the nines every time I saw Brian. Like, it wasn't like I was in my PJs and, the mom bun. Like, every time he saw me, I was like completely put together. And so I thought I was going to be able to do something. So for quite a few months, I was praying, though. I was praying a lot and knew that there was power in prayer because I was learning and reading the Bible and going to church. And I got involved in a small group that was like a Bible study for moms and just learning. I was learning a lot. So, but I was controlling a lot myself, trying to talk him into things. I went to a Christian counselor that I found on the website, Focus on the Family website. And I went to him and I asked Brian if he would go with me. And he's like, fine, I'll go. This was probably a month after he had left. And we went there. I insisted that we ride together.
Okay.
And we got there and we sat down in a small little office and on a couch next to each other. And he was a Christian counselor, and he asked, like, well, what's going on here? And Brian looked him dead in the eye and says, I'm just hoping that by you hearing this, she will hear me. I don't want to be married. I want to be divorced. And I don't want to be doing this.
Okay, wow.
And he said, okay, I'm going to talk with you guys separately. And so he put me out in the waiting area, and he talked with Brian for a short time. And then Brian sat in the waiting room, and he brought me in, and he was amazing. And he did say, we're going to have to work on you. And let's see what Scripture has to say. And he just said, you need to just separate that right now. And I was like, oh, okay. And I'm going to meet with you guys separately. Brian didn't go back. And I continued to go.
Okay. And what counsel did you feel like he gave you that was helpful in that season?
Oh, he taught me a lot about Jesus, and he just guided me in direction in my personal relationship with Jesus and who I needed to be as a Christian, and also gave me some advice on the specific situation that I was in. So this counselor deals with sexual sin and pornography addiction. And so he taught me a lot about what was happening so I could take the shame and the insecurity off of myself and recognize that this was an addiction and that my husband was a victim of it as well. And so it was very helpful. I also met with Pastor Wes, that was helping me as well. I remember there was a time that I sat in his office in complete tears. I didn't know, I'm learning, I'm trying to figure this out. I want my marriage, and at this time people were saying, divorce, that you can, and in Matthew it does. And it's even written in my Bible now to this day. Wes said such wise words. He says, absolutely, Jesus gives permission in this situation, but it's not recommendation. I was like, whoa, that really, okay, well then I'm going to fight. And the more I've learned over time that we do need to take the whole counsel of God, that one scripture, yes, that does give permission, but there's so much other that talks about how much marriage, how important it is and what it means to Jesus, and that there is redemption in it.
That's good.
So, yeah.
That's really good.
So in the day-to-day, what were so you're in this fight for your marriage. What were some of the practical ways that you did that? Because had he filed for divorce at this point, or was that?
Right. So the practical, I was getting more and more in the Word. Lots of prayer. I joined some small groups that would help me learn more. I did start taking a couple classes at college that made me think of something other than my situation. I needed distractions. And I had some friends that were really great in helping me with that. But again, it was really up and down. That's what's so hard. It's I would take 5 steps forward and 3 steps back.
Yeah.
And so it really was just constant immersion in the Word. That is really what I did. And nobody had filed for divorce, and I had that in my head, but I was starting to get pressure, outside pressure from family and friends. What are you gonna do? You can't live like this forever.
Right.
Because Brian would not file for divorce. I don't know why. He still doesn't know why he wouldn't. He said that he just didn't want people to hate him more than, he still had that. He's well, I just don't want him to hate me more, so he was just gonna make me
wait you out,
wait me out, see how long this could go. I guess.
Wow.
He doesn't really have an answer for it, but basically, he was willing. I don't really care. I'm living my life.
Right.
You do what you want.
Yeah.
And so I was starting to get a lot of pressure. You can't live like this. You keep, and I'm sure I looked just up and down all the time. You don't have a direction. You're just hanging in limbo, and we can see this. And I'm I just didn't know. And I was getting more and more pressure. And so 7 months later, after he had left, it was February, I decided, I can't take this pressure anymore from the world. I can't do it. So I went to the lawyer's office and I filed for divorce. And I was a mess the whole time. I did not want to do it. And I felt like I was failing God by doing it. I really did. I was he told me to hold on, and I can't hold on. What's this look like? And so it was a real strange internal battle. I went to lawyer's office, but because I didn't want to file for divorce, and because I didn't want a divorce, I told the lawyer what I wanted written up in the legal documents. And I told him that I wanted for the temporary, it wasn't going to be final because we had a child, so it was going to take this 6-7 month long process. So there needed to be temporary legal documents for Brian to be served and signed. And I said, well, I want it to say that he has to pay all my bills and I get to live in the house, that he gets his son these certain days, but he works nights, so I don't want him staying the night, and he has to be at his parents' house to be able to have him. And there were some more ridiculous things that were written in these documents, and the lawyer's he can fight this, right? And this could be drawn out and cost you a lot of money. I said, I'm willing to do that. And he still was like, are you sure? Like, this is what you want? Because then, like, this could be a long battle for you and a really hard emotional one later on, because he can fight all of this. And I'm like, nope, let's do it. And all right, he took my money. He was like, okay. Like,
Right.
like,
What does he care?
Right. But he was being kind.
Right,
and, like,
but he's giving you good advice. But if
Right.
that's what you want, you're
that's what
the
you want.
customer,
All
right? So
like, I'm gonna make a lot of money off you,
Right.
crazy woman. So he's like, okay, so do you want to pay a carrier to have him served? And I'm like, as much as I would love to have that happen at work for him, I don't want that. Like, there's something in me that's like, no, that wouldn't be right. Like, I don't want to have him served. Can he come in and sign the papers? He's like, if you can get him in here, yeah, he has 10 days to sign these papers. I'm like, okay. And so I told him that I filed for divorce and that he needed to go to the lawyer's office and sign the papers. And he said, where and when?
Wow.
And I took him in there. He seriously just like skimmed through it, signed it,
Wow.
and walked out. And that felt like the knife that was already in there was twisted, that he didn't even care. He wanted to get rid of me that fast, like
At any cost.
At any cost, that he was willing to sign it.
And this is 7 months later, basically, right? This is
It was 7 months later.
So at this point, I mean, and you're still interacting with him because of Bryce.
Yes.
You have to share some custody.
You're right.
What is the interaction like? What are your emotions? There must be anger. There must be resentment, bitterness. I mean, what is that interaction like? And what is your tone towards Brian when you see him?
So that 7 months leading up to the divorce I was very angry. I said words that I've never said in my entire life that I couldn't believe came out of my mouth, like just complete anger and bitterness. And when I would see him and then there was times where I wanted to completely ignore him, or I would give little jabs like, so you're really going to do this? You're really going to leave your son? Like, I would say things just to dig. And then there would be times where I would try to be nice. And so it was like up and down for those 7 months. When he signed the divorce papers, it hit something in me. It really shook something, and I know it was God. And I did meet with Pastor Wes, and I told him, I said, all I've wanted to be was a mother and a wife. Like, that's all, that's all I want to be. I know that's what God called me to be. And he like looked at me so serious, like, he's like, well, you are. And I'm like, he's like, you still are a wife. And you still are a mother. That hasn't changed. Just because you filed for divorce, God could use this however he wants. You're not divorced. You are his wife. And I'm like, okay, so what do I do then? Like, and he's like, but your role is gonna look so different than any other wife, because your husband doesn't live with you. And so that's where he gave me 1 Peter 3. Says, wives, in the same way, be submissive to your husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. And he gave me that scripture. He just wrote the reference on a card. And he said, you go read this. And I did. And I prayed so hard that God would make me that woman. And I prayed every day, and I felt it in me, the softness. I was able to forgive him. And our interactions got a lot better. And I'd have to prep myself every time, like, God, remember I asked you, because I don't know if I can. Like, this is really hard.
Yeah.
This is really hard. And it wasn't easy, but God gave me the strength in it. And sometimes it was just a hi, how are you? That was the end of our conversation. But it was better than me yelling and screaming and acting like a lunatic. And Sometimes I could be a little nicer, but that's how.
What was your goal? You said you prepped yourself. So what was your overarching goal when you interact with Brian? I want to be this or do this. What's
I
that?
wanted to see him saved, regardless of if our marriage was ever. I had a little boy that needed a daddy that was going to raise him up the way that I knew he needed to be. And so at that point, I had this idea of marriage and this dream, and that was definitely swept out from under me. Like, I didn't think that could ever happen to me. That was an idol in my life. My marriage, Brian, I made Brian God. My whole life depended on what he was doing, and my emotions were based on that. Any problem that I had, Brian was to fix it. Like, that was what I did. And I came with those prayers of becoming this woman. I knew that Brian couldn't be that. I had God now. And that he was to be that for me. And I remember another quiet time that God said in this time, Randi, you've been controlling all of this. You've been trying to do it. Let me just have you. Let me do it. And let Brian be mine. He's not yours. And all of that, I just let go. I really just let go of Brian.
So how did you're, spending this time praying, Lord, make me this woman. You're interacting with Brian. What happened next? When did you see something change? How long was that?
Okay, so it was pretty close after I filed for divorce that I started transforming into what God wanted me to be as this wife and this woman. And so there was not a whole lot. I decided I'm going to live day by day. Whatever God had for me for that day, I was going to take it, and I needed that focus instead of looking far off, like, what's going to happen if I'm divorced? How am I going to do this? Because that was a huge fear. Like, how am I going to be a single mom? What am I going to do? That was a huge focus for a very long time, and I decided I need to take it one day at a time. What does God have for me? I ended up taking a long-term substitute. I was a teacher, a substitute teaching job in Byron High School, and it was also a great distraction from that. It gave me a focus. I met a wonderful Christian girl there who now works at this church. And she would come in and we would talk, and it was like I had a little bit of accountability in this young girl in my classroom, and it just drawing closer and closer to God and praying that he would transform me, and I could start to feel it in me. Well, I didn't see anything in Brian. And I would even say to God, like, I'm doing this. Like, why am I not seeing anything? Like, why is he so cold? Please just save him. Like, I don't want him to die not knowing you. Like, that was my fear now. That
it had totally changed.
It totally changed my focus from me to something else. Like, I was so self-focused, and now my eyes were opened that that's not what matters anymore. And so that's what season, but come June, unless you have another question.
Well, I wondered, there had to be times in there, like you for months now, you tried to wait, and then you filed for divorce. He signs it. He doesn't care. He's still so cold. There had to be times where you thought about yourself, am I crazy? Like, why am I not quitting? Like, maybe it's time to call it and trust the Lord's going to give me something different. And so I guess, what does that look like? On the days that you were tempted to quit, why didn't you?
So when I would feel that, I had my brother-in-law was amazing. Like, even when I found out about this other woman, I called him because I remembered at my wedding that he told me, if you ever need anything in your marriage, you call me. And I called him. So this was way back 4th of July weekend.
Yeah.
I said, hey, I don't know what's going on. There's this weird phone number. I called it. It's another woman. Brian says it's this. He doesn't want to be married. And he's kind of talking about, like, that maybe we shouldn't be married, that we aren't meant for each other, but he's not saying he wants a divorce yet. And he said, hey, sis, give me a couple hours, I'm going to call you back. And he lives in southern Indiana. I'm like, all right, give me a couple hours, I'll call you back. And he called me back. He's like, okay, I picked up the girls, his wife and his daughter. We're on our way.
Oh, wow.
And he came up, and he shared the gospel with Brian that night.
Wow.
Or it was the next day, because they got there late at night. But he shared the gospel with Brian. So he was there with me every step of everything, and he would pray for me. He would pray with me. He ministered to men. He has a men's ministry down in Indiana, and he had all of those guys praying for us. Wow. And he would call and check in. And so when I would have those moments where I'm like, I can't do this, I'd call him and I'd say, hey, I don't know if I can do this. Yes, you can, sis. You know what? We're praying. You can do this. Like, I'm here. Whatever you need, we're praying. We'll just see what happens. But you're doing the right thing. And he would just be encouraging, like just normal. He didn't try to like preach or anything. He was just like, you got this. Like we're praying. God's got a hand in it.
So at what point did you start to see something soften or change in Brian?
So it was, my birthday's in the middle of June, and so that's why I remember this, but it was like the day before, the day after my birthday, I had a call from Brian, which wasn't unusual, but he didn't call me very often. We had a schedule, like wasn't very often unless he needed something changed, which was every once in a while. But he called and left a voicemail. Like I saw him, I'm not answering this. Like it's my birthday weekend. Like, like I have like drama. This isn't. You know, yeah. There's nothing in the schedule. Like I don't really need to. He doesn't have my kid. Like I don't need to talk to him. And so, and he left a voicemail. And this was like the middle of the afternoon. And he said, "Hey, I'm just wondering, can we talk about something? Just give me a call." Can we talk about something? Like, no. What does he have to talk about? Like, really? So I just, I prayed a lot that evening. So after I put my son to bed, I called him and I said, hey, what's up? He's like, I don't know. And then there was like silence. Like,
okay. But you called me, so.
Right. And I was like, okay, like, do you need something? Like, I just don't know how you're going to answer this. I'm like, well, I've heard a lot, so whatever you got, like, just do it. And so he said, I don't know, like, I just been thinking about things. Is there any hope for our marriage? I said, excuse me? Like, could something even work? And I'm like, well, this is quite random. And you know what? There's always hope. That's all I said. And he's like, okay. And we had a court date coming up on June 18th. And that was going to finalize all those temporary orders, which would make it very hard for him to change them later with final orders. And so I'm like, that's why he's calling me. This has to be it. And so I said, well, I'll see you at the courthouse on the 18th. He's like, all right, I'll see you then. And so I'm like, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah. Right.
I really didn't know what
It'd be hard to trust it even. Like, is this coming from a real place? Like,
right. I had no idea. Yeah. I'm like, I was definitely thrown. Like, this was not the life I had been living. And
even though it's what you prayed for, but it's like, what?
Right. Like, I mean, I had hope for it, but, you know, sometimes that starts wearing off after so long, like, that you start to believe this isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, that was definitely, like, regardless, I'm going to be okay, but this is probably not my future. Like, and so we got to the courthouse, and he's like, I don't want to go through with this. Like, what can we do? I said, I don't even believe you. Like, I don't know what to believe right now. I said, but I'm not going to just go withdraw that. Like, like that's not going to happen. And he's like, and this is a Randy that he'd never seen. I was never that like strong. Like I would have just buckled at anything. And he's like, okay. I said, maybe they can postpone it. And he's like, you think so? I said, I don't know. You go in there and do it. And he's like, okay. He didn't even get a lawyer.
Wow.
He had no lawyer.
Okay.
So he had to go in with my lawyer, because my lawyer comes out, are you guys ready to go in? I said, he wants to postpone this. And he's like, is that a possibility? And the lawyer's like, yeah. I mean, we could set it out another 6 months. And Brian's like, I'd like to do that. And he's like, okay. And he's like, okay, well, then you come in. And he told me to stay out. And Brian went in and postponed everything for 6 months. So it would be December. And he came out, and I was like, you really just did that? He's like, I did. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, I really don't know what to think right now. And I said, I'm going to go home. He's like, well, can I follow you? Where's Bryce? I said, I think he was at my parents'. It was either our parents or friends. Like, lots of people watched him. And he's like, so he's not at home? And I'm like, no. I said I was going to take some time to myself before I went and got him. Today's kind of been a hard day. And he's like, well, can I meet you at the house? And I just said, okay, go ahead. So he met me at the house, and I wouldn't let him come in. But it was a nice day. It was June.
Yeah.
So I didn't make him stand in the rain or anything. But we have a porch, and we were sitting on the porch, and I'm like, so... Like, he had, like, nothing to say again. I'm like, what is going on here? And I finally just said, okay, I need to know one thing. Like, if we're going to take any kind of next steps, I need to know one thing. Because I have found a faith in Jesus. And that is where my life is now. Where are you at with that? Like, I really just, like, where are you at with God and Jesus and anything? And he's like, I don't know. Like, do you know him? Do you know who Jesus is? He's like, not really. I don't think so. But I think I'm starting to get to know him. I'm like, well, that's kind of strange. Like, how are you doing this? Like, I'm like hoping for him to say, like, I'm reading the Bible or going to church, which I didn't think he was doing. Well, he could have been reading the Bible, but I'm like, I don't think he's going to church. And he said, because I see him in you, and I want what you have.
Wow.
And I knew right then that it was God, and that was the answer I'd been praying for, and that it was going to be okay.
Wow. So powerful. So it's almost a year.
It's almost a year.
Wow. So after that, you guys start, I know we're all like,
I know. I don't have a question. I just need to sit here for a minute.
That I remember years ago you telling me that he had said that, and that has always stuck with me because I've talked to a lot of women that are in struggling marriages, some not even to the degree that yours is. Yours is one of the most severe that I have talked to and personally witnessed.
Okay.
Because it was so final. He was gone. He was with somebody else. He'd obviously found happiness with somebody else, and he didn't want you.
Right.
But the Lord miraculously worked through your testimony. Because sometimes I think as women, we can look at that 1 Peter 3 verse and think, does this work? You know, like, I'm just supposed to be godly and be who I'm called to be, and this is going to win my husband over to something, you know? But I always come back to the fact that I have seen this work in your life, that and that word, when it talks about win him without a word, literally means without the word, that even an unsaved person who doesn't know the Lord, who is not in contact with the word, can see that written on our lives and we're obedient. And I think that's so incredibly powerful. And you were just a baby, brand new believer.
Yeah.
I was.
Like, that
I didn't
God,
have any words to
you didn't
give
have
him.
any, yeah.
I couldn't.
Really?
I couldn't share scripture with him. I was just learning myself. I am so thankful that I didn't know, because with my personality, God knew. Like, with my personality, I was very controlling. I would have tried to win him with the literal word.
Like, it says this.
I would have been slapping him with it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure of it. And I didn't have it for him. But I knew what it was doing in my life. And I knew the part where it says a quiet and gentle spirit. That's what I prayed for. Like, God, make me a quiet and gentle spirit, because Brian was the only person that never saw a quiet and gentle spirit. Like, I could put on a really good front, but he was my husband. Like,
Yeah.
He saw
knew.
the real deal.
Yeah. So powerful. And I think as women, we naturally don't have a quiet and gentle spirit. That's probably why it says that in there.
Yeah.
We do tend to be more naggy or controlling or manipulative, and that's how we try to gain power, really, in our marriages. And it is a fight to be who we're called to be, but but it works. I mean, this gives a blessed marriage and a good foundation.
It does.
But it had to be, I would imagine, you're sitting on that porch and he says, I can see him in you. And as much as that is like, oh, praise the Lord, this is what I've been praying for, there had to also be a bit of fear.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I would be terrified to entrust my heart to this person again that has shattered it once already.
Yes.
How do you work through the betrayal and the forgiveness? You know, it's one thing to forgive, okay, he's moved out, I'm coming to peace with this is what my life is now, and I'm forgiving that. To actively walk in forgiveness, to enter back into relationship with this person, and trust your heart and know that he could shatter it all over again. How in the world do you do that?
Yeah. That was all the thoughts that I had. Like, I was like, okay, he just gave me this huge bomb. What am I going to do with it? Like, I'm a very like analytical thinker, so I'm like, and logical, like, okay, like put the point A here, and like, and I'm like, I don't have a map for this. Like, what am I to do now? And he had left. Like, he really did not spend very much time on my porch. It maybe 15, 20 minutes, like nothing significant. And I was like, okay, what do I do with this? Like, this information, my divorce is postponed, so now I have to live this for another 6 months. And what I did was I prayed for a few days, like, what's going to be my next step? And it was like, I had to make the decision, and I felt like God had put it on my heart. You need to make the decision. You have been saved, by faith through grace from me. Like, you are saved in your salvation. But now you need to put your faith to work. Do you really believe what you say you believe? And that's where Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Trust him in all the ways, and he will make your path straight. I had to do it. I knew that it was from God, and I was not going to trust Brian. And I told God, I can't trust him. I'm going to trust you.
Yeah.
If you're saying you're going to save my marriage, I'll trust you.
That's good.
And so I trust God. I did not trust Brian. There was no trust there. He had to earn that back.
Did your family say you were crazy to take him back after all this time, or were they?
Yes, there was. But then there was some like surprising support from some people. But yes. Yeah.
So you're kind of going against everybody else. Like, you're against.
I did feel very alone. I did feel very, and like I said, you have lots of sin ripples through so many people, and so many people are affected, and they're affected in different ways. And so you still have people grieving through this process of how they've been affected. So they can't really be there for you in the ways that you need them to be, because they're wrestling their own emotions. And especially if they don't even believe, like those aren't the people. Now I know who to seek. We're here, a year later, and I know where the wisdom is. And I had to avoid a lot of people, and it was really hard. And this is not a recommendation to anybody, but for me personally, I needed to know that every little step was from God. And the only way to do that was to shut off everything. I stopped going to the counselor. I stopped meeting with Pastor Wes. I would call my brother-in-law once in a while if I needed a specific prayer for myself. But he really didn't know what was happening. And my family, I just kind of would avoid this topic. We would just do lighthearted, fun family things, and I would just avoid it. I didn't talk about it. It was just me and God. From June until Brian moved home in October.
Wow.
I just sit here stunned. I'm like looking at these cards, like I don't know what to ask. Just keep talking.
Okay, but
Yeah.
okay, so you're at divorce proceedings to be finalized,
Yeah.
which gets postponed, and then you go from is there a still shot to him moving in. That is a lot of ground to cover
It's a lot.
between you.
It
So
was-
like what were the steps?
Yeah.
like
Did you
what's-
go on a date? Like,
Right.
what? I don't know.
No, for real. I know it's crazy. So honestly, it was a lot of waiting for me. This was a true test in patience because I wanted Brian to be saved, and I knew that his faith had to be his own.
Yeah.
I couldn't do anything if this was going to be real, and I wanted a true biblical godly marriage. He needed to come to Jesus on his own and follow him with his own heart. I could not do that.
Yeah.
And that was a process for him. He had a lot to wrestle through. More than I even knew at the time what he had. I'm like, it's just easy. Like, get rid of her.
Jesus.
Come home. Like, follow
Was he still
Jesus.
seeing her at this? Was he living with her at this time when he comes and says, "Do we have hope?"
Well, that was a question I did. I should have said. I asked him if he was seeing her, and he said, "No, I broke things off."
Okay.
I'm like, "Well, I don't believe you, but you have to prove it to me." This was a woman at work.
Okay.
He got a new shift. I did
Okay.
not tell. I also had a list that I wrote and I kept in my Bible, and I would pray about, God, you know me, and I need to see these things in order to know that he's trustworthy. Like he needs to do these things. He got a new shift at work,
Okay.
and so he wasn't with her anymore at work. And then he just it was slow. It was really slow. He started listening to sermons, the Rock online.
Okay.
So praise the Lord for online podcast. It was like recordings at the time. They weren't even videos. And so he was listening to those, and I didn't ask a whole lot of questions. It was a really hard time for me. It was very lonely. But I purposely made it that way as well. It wasn't like anybody did anything. It was, I just needed to know that everything was from God and that it was true. It just had to be so clear to me. And I knew that the pressure got to me, and that's why I filed for divorce. So I'm like, I gotta get rid of all the pressure for even the people that wanted the marriage to work so bad. I didn't want them influencing any decisions that I made. I wanted it to just be from God. And
And it could have been really easy when you saw that little glimmer of hope to try to take the control back and like, okay, well, he's kind of interested. So like, no, I'm going to get him saved and do this and, take the control back in that situation instead of still, like you said, just trusting the Lord and waiting for his timing and all those things.
Yeah. So that time was just hard. I mean, there's no other way to explain it. There was so many blessings though that came through it. I learned a lot about patience and perseverance, and just tried to walk the best that I knew how.
And you tried yourself to still be godly despite his sin.
Yes.
I think that's a big piece of healing any broken marriage. A lot of times we can look at somebody else's sin and then, well, he's doing this, so I don't have to do this. And the fact is, we're still called to be godly no matter what.
Right.
And you could have given yourself a lot of passes because that wound was so big and he had been so terrible to not be who you were called to be, but before the Lord.
And there was some wake-up calls in there that was like, I could possibly, I was having some influences from some people. They're like, let's go out, let's go do this. And I'm like, okay, I'll go out with them. And then I was like, that was a bad idea. Okay. Let's clean the slate again. Like I'm not, because then they would start talking like, you need to date. And wait, no, I'm like fighting for my marriage here. Like, I just thought we were going and having a nice dinner. And wait a second. Like
an intervention.
Right. And so it was just like, yeah, let's go to this bar. And I'm like, no, I can't. Like, and so it was like, but then it's like, I want to be normal. I was like trying to, it was it was a hard road, but I also thank God for like that little fear that like I know it was God that had it in me from the time I was a little girl to like always be obedient and always like, I'm thankful that he gave that to me because it's protected me from a lot of awful things.
Yeah, because sin begets more sin and
Right.
more destruction. So as much as sometimes I think sin is easier in that moment because we react out of our flesh to be sinful,
Yeah.
it really does cause so much more destruction.
Right.
So if we can control that blast radius a little bit, if we walk obediently and we walk
Absolutely.
faithfully,
Yes.
it doesn't make it not difficult, but I think it brings blessing later. And that's the part that is hard to hold on to, the blessing later. We live so much for the now and what feels good in this moment. And I'm in so much pain, so I'm going to go freak out and go crazy and, but that's not the
Yeah.
path.
No, and so I just let Brian do his thing. I really did. And he, I think in August, the Lake Day was coming up, and I was like, do I ask him if he wants to go? Do I not? And I just said, hey, there's this Lake Day at church. Would you like to go with Bryce and I? And he's like, I really would like to go. And I was like, okay. And so he came to church that day, and there was like a smile on his face and the softness to him. And that was like really one of the, besides just exchanging our son and it being more friendly and loving now, it was like the first time we actually, so from June to August, like did something together as a family. And then from there, he agreed to start meeting with Pastor Wes, and we went on a couple dates. And then in October, Brian had won, he's a golfer, and he won like this like golf resort like weekend thing, and he could use it anytime in that year. And he's like, you want to go away for a weekend? And that was October 14th, 15th, 16th. And I said, yeah, I think we met with Wes, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, we were together, and I'm like, I don't know if we should go on like this weekend. He's like, why not?
Yeah, it's weird.
Like,
Why, you're married.
Right.
But yeah,
But it was a weird,
Yeah.
like, are we ready for this? He's like, I think it would be great. Go ahead. I'm like,
funny.
okay. like, I needed permission or something, but it was
Yeah.
just such a long road. And I'm like, well, what is the next? I need another step. Like, what? When is it appropriate? Like, what's going on? And we went away that weekend, and we came back home, and my son was at my mom and dad's, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna go get Bryce. I said, if you want to stick around to see him, and he's like, yeah, I'd really like that. And I said, as a matter of fact, why don't you just stay?
Wow.
And he's like forever?
Oh.
And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, that's really good because I put all my stuff in the truck.
Wow,
So
that's
he moved
crazy.
home. And during that time, he had joined a small group that was talking about what a godly man and a godly husband was. I was in a small group on what a godly wife was. So when we came together, I thought it was going to be such a challenge. And it really wasn't.
Wow.
And Brian had back surgery in September and was off work until December. So we were together 24/7.
Wow. Okay.
Which was also a blessing. Like,
Yeah.
at first I was like, oh my.
Go from 0 to 60 here. Like, okay.
Yeah, but it was a true blessing that we could truly work on our marriage and honestly do all the premarital things that you would do before you get married. Like, sit down and talk seriously about topics and who are we and what are we going to do. And it was really amazing.
So, I mean, what has God done in your marriage? Who's Brian now versus who he was then? How is it different? And are you glad you stayed?
I am so glad I stayed. So he is not anything like the man that I married. He's completely transformed and different. He's the man that I prayed for sure. Like, I have journals of my prayers during that time, and God answered above and beyond all
praise
of
the
them.
Lord.
And he's an amazing husband. He's a godly husband. He's a godly father.
To how many kids now?
I have 5 children now. We've had 4 little girls
So awesome.
since then, and it's just been blessing upon blessing.
It's so crazy. I told Wes that you were coming on. I was
Mhm.
like, oh, Randy's gonna do Walk Worthy, and I said I sort of hesitate to ask her sometimes because I feel like, do you always want to be the person that here's my testimony? And I was telling him about our conversation and how great it was that you feel like you wanted to use this for the Lord and that this is his story and what he's done out of it. And Wes said, it's so crazy because the Cecils come in. And they come into church and he's like, I forget all that even happened. He's like, I just see this family come in. I'm like, oh, the Cecils are here. And like, oh, great. Good to see you and your kids. And you guys just file in. And he's like, I have, like, now that you say that she's coming on, he's like, I have to dig back and remember that is the story, because to look at your family, you would never know.
You would never
You
know.
would never know,
Mm-mm.
ever. That brokenness is way back there, but God has so rooted it out and restored it. It's such an amazing picture of what God can do in his redemptive power
Absolutely.
in a marriage.
Yeah,
Incredible.
when I share the story with people that I've met that know Brian, they can't believe that was him. Like, they just can't put it together. Like,
Yeah.
he's so amazing, and he's just an amazing husband.
That's so great.
Yeah.
So I have a few follow-up questions as we digging in.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have something I want to
You
interrupt.
go.
Okay. But it was it ever hard to separate who Brian was from who Brian was becoming and is, in that process of healing?
Yes, it was at first, because I didn't know this new Brian. I had to get to know him, but I had to be willing to do that. And so that was just another faith moment to trust and follow God, that I'm just going to get to know him like he's somebody new, because he is.
That's
And
good.
so it was hard at first, and I would have to just remind myself. And I would have to say, he's not who he was. I would literally say that outside. Or out loud. outside.
outside.
Sometimes. But I would have to say it out loud, so that he is not who he was.
Did you feel you had to literally cut the thoughts off because because you could be tempted to run down a path of
Oh, absolutely.
dwelling on all this destruction?
Oh, yeah.
Even while you're together, even as God has done the miracle, even
Yes.
as, how do you do that? How does there might be someone right now struggling with
Yeah.
wrestling through this, and you're trying to fix the marriage, but all this hurt. I mean, it was a year of intense, incredible pain inflicted on you by this person that now you're living with and you're supposed to just love.
Right. Well, that's where godly counsel comes in. Like, it was so amazing. Like, to have people, wise people who are for marriage, that love you and love the Lord, when you're in those moments, to be honest about it. You have to be honest, and you can't hide it. It's there. We're human. The emotions are there. The hurt's there. It doesn't just disappear now
right.
that, we still have feeling. And so you have to be intentional. You have to be willing to ask for help. And also, I had to talk to Brian about it. He had to know. I couldn't just sweep it under the rug. Like, if we were going to have an open and honest marriage, he needed to know when things were brought up that were hurting. And so that he could help me through that as well, because if he didn't know, how would he understand how to help?
Right.
And he was very good about that. He wanted me to tell him when I was struggling with trust issues or hurt or whatever it is, bitterness. I had to be willing to be honest.
And how did he help you through some of that? What could a husband do to help a wife?
He was very reassuring. I mean, that's really good. He placed a ton of boundaries. Those were some of the things I prayed for. He placed a ton of boundaries in our marriage to protect himself along with our marriage and to help me to build that trust. And so he would call me and text me every time he went to work, and then when he came home, I'm leaving work, I'll be home in 30 minutes, or I just got to work, love you, just simple little texts like that made a world of difference. He was just reassuring. I love you. Just soft with that. He wasn't trying to be big and manly, He was really patient with me as well. He had to be patient. And he would pray. He would say, let's just sit down and pray about this. And those were the things that he did.
That's really good.
So good.
More. I have a couple more, unless you have some.
I mean, I don't care. I'm
I know
just
this is
listening.
longer
Yeah.
than normal, but I feel like it's such an
Okay.
important thing.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Were you ever in a situation where you would bump into that woman again? Does she still work at that hospital? How do you navigate all that?
Yeah, I don't know if she still works there now.
Okay.
When I was pregnant with my third baby, I was walking into an appointment because I had my babies at the same hospital my husband works. And we crossed in a parking lot, and she knew. She locked eyes with me. I locked eyes with her, and there was a physical reaction,
Yeah, I bet.
okay, how am I going to react to this? And I just kept walking past, and I dealt with it, and I told Brian about it, and we just moved on. I was to that place.
Yeah.
So by the time my third, I was almost due. I was very
Yeah.
pregnant. I think it was the last appointment before I had her. So she was born in 2015.
Okay.
So it was 4 years later.
What's your feeling toward her? You had to work toward forgiveness with her even.
I did.
Why, what do you feel about that woman?
I mean, I went through phases.
Yeah.
At first, I wasn't too happy with her.
I can imagine.
And I did get to a place of forgiveness, and I feel I still to this day pray for her salvation.
Yeah.
As far as I know, up until the information I was given, she is not saved. She also had a family that has ended in divorce.
Wow.
She was married. She has children, and so whenever I do think about it, instead of and sometimes I will still have a little bit of a little hurt. I take that opportunity to pray for her because there's a reason that's coming up, and when I pray, it helps.
Yeah.
That's really good. Okay, this is maybe a difficult question because Brian was the one that stepped out on you.
Yes.
But and I want to be very clear, we're not responsible for anyone's sin.
Right.
But looking back in that marriage, you didn't know the Lord. Was there anything that you did that you felt contributed to the breakdown of your marriage?
Yeah. Well, I didn't know the Lord, and I was ignorant to even what a wife, godly wife, any kind of wife, because God created it to be.
Yeah.
And so I was very, it says in Genesis after the fall that, the wife will want control.
Yeah.
I was the leader.
Mm.
I made all the decisions, and he just let me do it. But I wasn't going to give it to him. I made a lot of the family decisions, like I said, about I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom now. I didn't even talk to him about it. I was just going to do what I wanted to do. And so that was something. And then also making my husband my God. That was such a weight for him to carry.
Yeah.
That he had to have felt whatever I do contributes to anything way that she feels or what she does, or I put that on him.
So even though this, obviously nobody would want or choose to go through this, the way you've been through, do you
Right.
look back, are there things that you're grateful for or that you've seen God redeem in your life, and fruit that has come out of it? Obviously your salvation
Right.
came through it, but are there other things that you see?
Yeah. Yes. So would I want to do this again?
Right.
Absolutely not. Would I change any of it? Not one bit of it. I'm so thankful for my salvation. I mean, right there is just everything.
Yeah.
My salvation came through this. And if this wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't have been so broken and need Jesus. I needed him. And that's number one. I mean, really but there has been other things. I mean, I have 4 daughters. I wanted to be a wife and a mother. I've got 5 kids, sometimes crazy to me. And, and just having the opportunity to be used by the Lord. I get to do this, and I look at it as a privilege and an honor. If God wouldn't have showed up in my life, he wouldn't be able to use me in this way.
For people walking alongside someone going through this, what did people do that was helpful, or what they do that was hurtful? If you can kind of coach people, well, do this, don't do this.
Oh, the helpful was some of the things that I've already said. My brother-in-law was so encouraging. Really, the number one thing that anyone, and however that looks in their life, is before the marriage. Don't take a side. Both parties are going to try to get you to take a side. Don't take a side. Like, be there for the marriage, because that's what needs to, be restored. And but you can support the people in it as long as you're leading them to the restoration of their marriage. So that is very, very helpful. Some practical things, like, I was so broken, I didn't know which way was up sometimes, like having help with my son, or, hey, you want to go out to lunch? Like, just little distractions that were positive. And I mean, I was just sitting there alone.
Yeah.
And so just practical, hang out with the person, pray with them. You don't have to do like big grand things and have immense wisdom for them. Just sit with them.
Yeah.
And so that I would say that what's not helpful is to take a side, to cut off a party one way or the other, that like just because you don't know if they're back together, like, like that could be. And then that's a whole nother.
Right, we could do another one on like what does it look like to come back into.
You could. And so that's a whole nother sin ripples. And so those that are walking alongside somebody, like, that marriage could be restored, and you're going to have to take ownership in how you were in that. And so, don't take a side. And then there were some things that were not helpful that people would say, and I know that it came from a really good place in their heart. They were trying to say encouraging good things, but sometimes I don't think we recognize like how hurtful even encouragement can be. Like it. But there was two things that were said to me that would hurt every time. Is God doesn't give you more than you can't handle. First of all, it's not true. And second of all, it's not helpful, because you're in it and you're like, but I can't handle it.
I don't feel like I can handle it.
Beyond capacity.
So like I'm confused and I'm feeling like I'm failing.
Yeah, right.
So for me personally, I took it as like, okay, they're going to think I'm a failure if I don't handle this correctly.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's what they meant by it, but that was the pressure that I felt.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I still get to this day that still kind of bothers me is I could never do that. And I'm like, well, I really hope that you don't. Like, I don't have anything to say to it, first of all. Like, it's not like, okay, now you've put me in an awkward place. Because I want to say, well, I hope you don't.
Right. Yeah, I hope you never have to. Right.
But that could come out rude and sarcastic.
Well.
And so, like, I don't want to be.
Maybe they do.
Maybe they do, but I don't want to be put in that position.
I understand. It's very right.
And then also, it's just like, it also just puts pressure. Like, I couldn't do that. Well, like,
but only by God's grace.
But
that's really like it wasn't.
That was all it was. Like, It like gives me this weird like I have no way to answer this, and it makes me uncomfortable because I don't want to talk about it. And so I'm sorry. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I know.
So it's
well-meaning. I
uncomfortable.
know.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, and it's trying to like encourage you, like, wow, so amazing.
Right. They come from a good place, but that's also the purpose of why Brian and I like to share our testimony, because those practical things could be helpful to somebody, and it's not just for the person walking through the storm. It's all those that are walking alongside them. And if that could help those people as well, I would really be blessed by that.
That's great.
If someone is watching this and is walking through a situation like this, maybe they're in the middle of it, what are like 3 things that you would say to them or you would encourage them with?
3 things.
3 things. I mean, it doesn't have to be 3 things. I just thought that might help you. Boom, boom, boom. Whatever you want.
Okay. We'll see if I can get to 3. The number one thing that I would say is that I would just really encourage them to seek Jesus, to understand who he really is. Put your focus on that. Understand the character of Jesus and how much he loves you and cares for you, and to just walk 1 minute at a time with that. Don't look
Mm-hmm.
into the future too far, because you don't ever know what God has. I mean, he can flip it for you at any second on whatever that way is. And if you're walking with Jesus and pouring your life and your focus into that, you already win whether or not your marriage is restored. Because a lot of women hear my story and they want that now.
Yeah.
The blessings that I have now, which I will never apologize for, because they are amazing blessings from God and I'm so thankful for them. But that's not everybody's journey.
Yeah.
And their marriage may end. We don't know what God has in store, but I know that God has good to come from it, and that you would never lose if you're walking with Jesus, because you'll have him.
That's good.
I don't know if that was right, but
That's
no,
excellent.
that's number
great
one.
answer.
that's what I would
Yeah.
say.
Awesome.
That's what I
So
would
good.
say.
Thank you
Randy,
so
thank you
much.
so much for
Thank you.
just unpacking all of that, and most importantly, just like pointing it to Jesus. It's like so powerful and so beautiful. And maybe you're watching today and maybe you're walking through this right now. Maybe you're walking alongside somebody who is walking through this. We hope that this was an encouragement to you, that God has spoken directly to you today. We are praying for you. You can do it. Keep going. God is faithful, and he will be with you every step of the way. So we will see you next month. But until then, walk worthy.